Curtis Maynard wasn't the type of man you'd expect to burn his whole family alive. He was a deacon, quiet, respected, steady. But one night, without warning, his wife and 2 children were found charred inside their small suburban home. The fire spread fast. Too fast. Curtis claimed he tried to save them, but escaped through the back door alone. By morning, the entire community was mourning alongside him, until his cousin disappeared, until the pastor resigned without explanation, and until investigators discovered that the fire might have started with a gas can and an argument minutes before the flames took over. What no one could explain was the video, a single clip buried in a family tablet, showing Curtis's wife and the family's pastor in a way no one should have seen, especially not their daughter. What happened that night wasn't spontaneous. It was a slow, brutal detonation, fueled by secrets, shame, and a child's accidental discovery. And when the truth surfaced, Curtis Maynard wasn't just the grieving husband. He became the face of a crime too calculated to forgive. You are welcome to True Crime's Corner. Let's get real quick into today's case. Stay with me. Curtis Maynard wasn't famous, but in East Pine, Louisiana, his name held quiet weight. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Not because he was loud, but because he was consistent. He worked at the same auto plant for over 2 decades, served as a deacon at the same church for nearly as long. The kind of man who kept to routine, paid his dues, and expected the same from everyone around him, especially his family. His wife, Lana, had met him in that same town nearly 20 years earlier. She was younger by 4 years, warmer, softer, a little more expressive than Curtis ever was. Most people said she was the reason the Maynard home ever had any light in it. She handled the kids, the calendar, and the conversations Curtis didn't feel like having. Their daughter, Aubrey, was in junior high. Smart, observant, always a little too quiet. Their youngest, Micah, had just turned 7. Talkative, energetic, still called his father Sir. To most people, the Maynards were what small-town families were supposed to be. Not perfect, just dependable. But the thing about families like that, they survive on silence. Not peace, silence. The kind that holds everything together, right up until the day it doesn't. And behind that silence sat one person no one ever paid attention to. Curtis's cousin, Russell Dees, ex-con, 2-time loser. He lived in the Maynards' small garage-turned-room in the back. Told people he was trying to get back on his feet. Didn't say much, didn't need to. He watched. And when the wrong moment came, he wouldn't blink. Curtis Maynard believed in control. Not the loud kind, not fists or shouting, but the slow, grinding kind you didn't question because it looked like order. He handled the bills, the rules, and the boundaries. Lana handled everything else. Not because they agreed on that arrangement, but because that's just how it played out. By her mid-30s, Lana had grown quiet in a way people often mistake for contentment. She smiled when spoken to, nodded in church, helped with potlucks, and made sure Micah's lunch didn't miss the juice box. But inside the house, she walked like someone always preparing for a small correction. A sigh from the hallway, a disapproving look, the cold withdrawal that lasted days. People rarely call that abuse, but sometimes silence can bruise louder than fists. Russell Dees saw it. He never said anything, but he saw it. He stayed out of sight most days, working odd jobs or sleeping late. But when Lana left the kitchen looking smaller than she entered, he noticed. He told a friend once, "Curtis doesn't hit her. He just presses down." Same result. Then came the slow shift. Lana began volunteering more time at the church, more side errands. Not to run from the family, but to breathe. And that's when Theo Riggins stepped in. Young, freshly appointed, and a little too kind for his own good, Theo carried sermons in his mouth but empathy in his eyes. He asked how she was. He actually waited for the answer. He didn't know everything. But sometimes, kindness from the wrong person is all it takes to open a door no one else sees. And someone was always watching through the crack. Pastor Theo Riggins wasn't new to Lana. He had only recently returned to East Pine to take up the pulpit. But his family roots were as old as the church pews. Years ago, before he went off to seminary, he had been just another quiet boy in town, easily overlooked. But Lana remembered his face from her early days at the youth service. What she didn't know then, and only began to suspect now, was the strange tension that simmered any time Theo crossed paths with her husband. It was Jasmine Riggins, Theo's older sister, who eventually put language to the silence. Not directly, not with names, but in hushed frustration over coffee after service one day, she said something that never left Lana's mind. "Some people around here been playing two sides of the cross for years. That's why they get real uncomfortable when certain faces show back up." Lana didn't ask questions that day, but her mind wandered. Meanwhile, Jasmine was aware of the romantic relationship between Curtis and Theo years ago before Curtis married Lana. Theo, much younger then, broke up with Curtis to go full-time into ministry. One night, while dropping off flyers after choir rehearsal, Theo lingered at the door. Lana thanked him. He didn't leave. What happened next wasn't planned, but it also wasn't stopped. The closeness, the eye contact, the mutual ache of people who'd been carrying too much for too long, it all cracked open in a single moment. What neither of them noticed was the device on the kitchen counter, still synced to the family's shared photo cloud. At home later that night, Lana moved quietly, as she always did. But something had shifted. She couldn't unfeel what had just happened. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure she wanted to. What she didn't know, what Theo didn't know, was that the fire they'd lit in secret had already started burning somewhere else. And it was going to swallow more than just them. The moment wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. A photo backup quietly uploaded in the background, unnoticed by anyone. A 10-second video, accidentally captured as Lana and Theo's moment unfolded, landed in the shared family cloud, accessible through a tablet Micah often used for games and schoolwork. It was their daughter, Aubrey, who stumbled across it first. She was looking for a presentation she'd made days earlier when she clicked into the wrong folder. What she saw didn't immediately make sense. Just her mother, the pastor, and something she wasn't supposed to see. She blinked, paused, closed the screen, and walked away. Hours passed before she said anything. It was dinner. The table was quiet, Curtis eating in the mechanical way he always did. Aubrey glanced between her parents and said softly, "I think Mom's video is in my folder." Curtis didn't speak right away. He simply asked for the tablet. She handed it to him, and he scrolled silently, with the same steady rhythm he used for everything else. His eyes found the file. He didn't react, not in front of the kids. He just locked the screen, stood up, and left the room. Later that night, he watched it again. Then again. Then he powered off the device and went to the backyard, where Russell was smoking alone by the shed. They didn't speak for several minutes. Eventually, Russell asked, "You good?" Curtis didn't answer. He didn't need to. What happened next wasn't a decision made in a single moment. It was a series of quiet, deliberate steps. Silent nights. Eyes that stopped blinking. words that stopped forming. Lana slept soundly that night, unaware that her worst mistake wasn't sleeping with Theo. It was letting a secret live in a house that wasn't built to carry it. In the days that followed, the mood inside the Maynard home shifted in ways only the children could sense. Lana remained unaware of what had been found. Aubrey, quiet by nature, kept to herself. But Curtis had changed. According to later statements from relatives, Curtis stopped sleeping in the bedroom without explanation. He stayed up late, walking the backyard in slow, repetitive laps. It was Russell Dees who began spending more time around Curtis during this period. Neighbors recalled seeing the two men outside late into the night, smoking, pacing, and sometimes sitting in silence near the garage door. Russell had no formal job at the time, but he appeared more present than ever. At some point, Curtis showed him the video. There were no witnesses to the conversation that followed, but what came next suggested that Curtis was no longer planning to carry the burden alone. The cousin who had once claimed to be rebuilding his life was now folded tightly into Curtis's unraveling. Meanwhile, Aubrey began writing more frequently in her notebook, entries that were later found and sealed as evidence. Short fragments, not full sentences. A few lines hinted at confusion, guilt, and an attempt to make sense of something far too heavy for a child to carry. For Curtis, he wasn't shouting. He was waiting. And Russell was watching the fuse burn. Around this time, Theo Riggins reduced his own presence. He stopped attending Wednesday meetings and began turning down small gatherings he once embraced. Witnesses later recalled he seemed preoccupied, often checking over his shoulder, no longer lingering after service. His sister, Jasmine, became increasingly vocal in private circles. Though no official accusations were made, it became clear she suspected something had gone wrong between Theo and someone in the Maynard home. Meanwhile, Russell Dees began making preparations that raised quiet concern among a few who knew him. He cleared out the small tool shed behind the Maynard residence, rearranged several fuel containers in the garage, and started spending nights in his parked vehicle rather than inside the house. One neighbor later stated that Russell looked like a man counting down to something. No one asked questions. Lana, during this period, reportedly attempted to repair the tension. She reached out to a friend in another parish, asking for references to a private marriage counselor. But she never scheduled the appointment. Whether she changed her mind or was prevented from following through remains unclear. The fire started just after 10:40 p.m. on a Friday. It was dry that week, low humidity, no wind. Conditions that gave flames a head start before neighbors even realized something was wrong. The first call to 911 came from a woman 3 doors down who noticed smoke curling above the rooftops while letting her dog out. By the time emergency responders arrived, the entire left side of the Maynard home was engulfed. Initial reports listed the blaze as electrical in origin. A faulty outlet, possibly the stove. But the pattern of burn spread told a different story, one that didn't match a standard kitchen fire. Accelerant was found near the base of the hallway, and investigators flagged 2 open gas containers discovered near the back porch. The only confirmed survivor was Curtis Maynard. According to his statement, he had been asleep in the living room when the fire started. He claimed to have woken to smoke, attempted to reach his wife and children, but was forced out by the intensity of the flames. He exited through the rear door and collapsed on the lawn. However, no soot was found in his lungs, an absence investigators later flagged as inconsistent with someone who had been inside a burning structure. His clothing was also found to be clean, without scorch damage or smoke residue. And when asked why he didn't call 911 himself, Curtis said he'd left his phone inside. Lana and both children were found in the hallway near the bedrooms. Fire officials determined that they had tried to escape. Micah's body was found only a few feet from the front door. Aubrey's was near her mother's. None of them made it out. Russell Dees was not at the scene. Neighbors later reported that his car had been missing since earlier that afternoon. Surveillance from a local gas station captured him around 6 p.m., filling up a red container and purchasing a lighter. He paid in cash. It would take another full day before fire investigators ruled out accident and officially labeled the fire suspicious. By then, the funeral arrangements had already begun. What remained was ash, speculation, and a family that burned from the inside out before the first match was ever lit. The Maynard funeral was held 5 days after the fire. It was a closed casket service. What was left of Lana, Aubrey, and Micah could not be prepared for viewing. Curtis stood at the front, silent throughout, dressed in black, flanked by 2 church elders who guided him to and from the altar. There were no words from him, no eulogy. Dozens attended, some out of grief, others out of obligation. But a quiet discomfort settled across the room, the kind of silence that doesn't come from sorrow, but suspicion. Something felt unfinished, even before the service began. Theo Riggins did not attend. He had not been seen since the night of the fire. Jasmine later told authorities he left town the following morning without notice, abandoning both his parsonage and the keys to his church office. His resignation letter arrived by mail 3 days later. No forwarding address. Curtis's behavior in the days after the funeral raised further concern. He returned to work. He declined offers for grief counseling. He resumed his grocery runs, visited the barber, and paid his utility bills on time. To those around him, his routine returned faster than expected. But when questioned, he always said the same thing. There's no guide for grief. A few neighbors attempted to offer support. None were allowed past the front door. One later recalled seeing Curtis repainting the living room alone the week after the funeral, as if trying to erase the memory entirely. Russell Dees remained unaccounted for. No sightings, no activity on his known phone number. One of his old friends in Shreveport told police he received a single voicemail a day after the fire, just heavy breathing and a single line before the call ended. They were never supposed to be in the hallway. That message was never traced. No formal charges had been filed. But behind the scenes, investigators were quietly building a case. The fire, the gasoline, the inconsistencies in Curtis's story, all of it was being catalogued. The only thing missing was motive. What no one realized was that evidence of that motive was still sitting in the cloud, untouched, unacknowledged, and about to surface in the most unexpected way. The first cracks in the silence didn't come from the police, or even from Curtis's inner circle. They came from a digital trail left behind by someone who didn't know she was documenting evidence. 2 weeks after the funeral, an anonymous blog post surfaced on a message board known for teen journal entries. The language was unfiltered and emotional. It spoke of confusion, betrayal, and a home that felt like walking on glass. The writer didn't name anyone directly, but the post mentioned a video, one she shouldn't have seen, involving her mother, and someone who wasn't supposed to be in our house like that. She also described her father watching the video alone, and then never speaking about it again. The post gained traction after a local high school counselor, who had once met Aubrey during a school visit, recognized the writing style and reported it. Investigators cross-referenced the post with device metadata and confirmed it was uploaded from a tablet linked to the Maynard home's Wi-Fi 2 days before the fire. It wasn't the only clue. Jasmine Riggins, still living in town, had been quietly holding on to an encrypted backup of Theo's old phone, which he had left behind when he fled. The device contained multiple auto-saved texts between Theo and Lana, some emotional, others implicating. One message simply read, "I don't think Curtis knows, but I don't know how long we can hide it." She turned the phone over to authorities the same day the anonymous post was flagged. It was the first time investigators had concrete links between the affair and the fire. That same week, a neighbor reported a strange voicemail left on her husband's phone. It was short. A man's voice, muffled, possibly Russell's, saying he shouldn't have left the house when he did, followed by what sounded like a sob and the words, "It wasn't supposed to catch like that." Taken together, the evidence formed a picture that prosecutors couldn't ignore. The video, the message boards, the burner voicemail, and the unexplained absence of Russell Dees all pointed in one direction. Curtis Maynard hadn't just lost his family. He'd built the fire that consumed them. And now, investigators were preparing to hold him accountable for what he never planned to explain. Curtis Maynard was arrested on a quiet Wednesday morning in early spring. He didn't resist. According to the arresting officers, he stood outside his home in a plain gray t-shirt, as if he'd been expecting them. No statement was given at the scene. No apology was made. The formal charges listed arson, second-degree murder, and endangering the welfare of minors. Prosecutors stopped short of charging him with premeditated homicide, citing lack of evidence that the fire was set with explicit intent to kill. But the circumstantial case was overwhelming. The video, the anonymous journal post, the auto-saved texts between Lana and Theo, and the inconsistencies in Curtis's own account painted a clear enough picture. Russell Dees remained missing. A federal warrant was issued, and his name was circulated across state lines, but no confirmed sightings have ever been reported. The voicemail he left and the purchases he made in the days before the fire were entered into evidence, but without his physical presence, the deeper motivations behind his role remain unanswered. Theo Riggins was interviewed by investigators out of state. He denied knowledge of the fire plan, claimed no involvement, and maintained that his departure was out of fear, not guilt. Legally, there wasn't enough to hold him. He hasn't returned to East Pine since. Jasmine Riggins, in a public statement, described the entire case as a slow-motion collapse and refused further interviews. The home where it happened remained empty for months before being demolished. The lot was never resold. Curtis eventually accepted a plea deal, avoiding trial in exchange for multiple counts of manslaughter and arson. He received a 60-year sentence without the possibility of parole. No formal memorials were held after the trial. Micah and Aubrey's graves remain largely unvisited, except for a neighbor who still leaves flowers once a year, with no name on the card. Curtis never gave a confession. He never spoke publicly about the night of the fire, or about the betrayal, or the video, or what he saw in his daughter's face the night she tried to tell him what she'd found. The silence that once held the family together was the same silence that buried them. And by the time the truth surfaced, there was no one left to save.